Hello and welcome to Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. The show today was recorded on the sidelines of the Jaipur Literature Festival in India. My guest, just one of the Pulitzer Prize winners speaking at the festival, was born in Houston and now lives in the Netherlands. He's the author of Why This World, a biography of Clarice Lispector, a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and a New York Times Notable Book of 2009. For his work bringing Clarice Lispector to international prominence, he received Brazil's first state prize for cultural diplomacy. He won a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2017, and for Sontag, her life and work, he won the Pulitzer. His most recent book, The Upside Down World, Meetings with the Dutch Masters, appeared in 2023. Benjamin Moser, welcome to Meet the Writers.
Thank you so much.
So here we are, we're in Jaipur, and of course that explains the bird song and the buzz of conversation you can hear in the background. But I would first just like for you to just set out what it's like for you being here in India at this festival.
Well, I love this festival. I think it's the biggest festival in the world, and it's in the most fabulous and also biggest country in the world. I came here for the first time in 2020, and it was in January, and I thought, what a wonderful country. I'm so excited to discover India. And then, of course, when I was here, I read in the newspaper that there was a new coronavirus in China, and then I went about my day and went and ate breakfast and didn't think about it. And then about 3 weeks later, the whole world sort of came to a crashing halt, and I thought, I'll never get to go to India again. And it was so sad because I felt like I just discovered it. And I kind of resigned myself to it. I thought, well, at least I saw it once. And to be back is just so exciting.
Well, it's absolutely wonderful to be here with you. I want to introduce you to our listeners who I'm quite sure will have heard of you because, of course, you won the Pulitzer Prize. But I'm very interested in knowing about the journey that takes you from a boy from Texas to this point. So tell me about your upbringing.
Well, it's always funny because, as Spinoza says, nothing could happen except exactly in the way that it happened. So I feel predestined. But I went to high school partially in France. And so I had lived in Europe before. And then I came back to the United States for university. And I thought I would stay. I loved living in New York, and I was very happy there. When I was 23, which is now more than half my life ago, I met a Dutch guy at my office. And sooner rather than later, I was living in Holland and still am. So that's the very TLDR version.
Tell me, though, about that upbringing in France, for instance. I mean, that must have given you sort of various European sensibilities that allowed you to adapt possibly more easily to living in the Netherlands. Why were you in France?
Well, because I wanted to go. I had an opportunity to go, and my family encouraged me to go, and so I did. And then I think, of course, it was sort of a culture shock, but I think once you've done that as a child, as a young person, you're not as scared of it. You know, like if I moved to Jaipur, I would be fine because I know how it is to learn a language. I know how it is to figure out where the good coffee is and all that stuff that when you stay in the same place, you don't even think about knowing all that stuff. But, you know, my new book, The Upside Down World, is about this process of disintegration. Because if you always live in the same country, you're just the same person. And you don't really think about your language. You don't really think about your culture. You don't think about, like Americans, we eat with our right hand. Our fork is in our right hand. Europeans eat with their fork in their left hand. I will never want to eat with my fork in my left hand. I will always have an English accent in any language I speak. It marks you in a way. But I think if you have that experience when you're young, you just become more flexible. And it's kind of easier because any kind of adaptation is something that you can learn. There's rules for it. There's ways to do it. Just like learning the grammar of a language. You know, there's an accusative case, and after this verb, you use that case. And you just say, okay, you know, the French, they eat at 8. I think that's too late. I'd like to eat at 6:30. But, you know, I'm in Paris, so I know it's going to be 8. And you just, but you do realize how much of you is your culture. And that's the part that I find scary. Because especially Americans, I think we're raised to think that we're really interesting and unique. And you realize, no, I'm just this sad collection of stereotypes. And when that's taken away from you, it's very disorienting because you think, oh, that's all I am. I'm just a bunch of things that were given to me, my culture, by my language, by my education, by my religion, by my class background, by all these things. You take all that away, it's not a lot left. You have to really rebuild yourself.
So give me, I mean, obviously English is the language, but tell me about class, religion, upbringing.
Well, I like to talk about class, actually, because I find it very important. I grew up, in a very comfortable way, and it was something that, having traveled as a child as well, especially to the third world, particularly Latin America, because we're from Texas and it's right next to Mexico, and having seen just how lucky we were, gave me a huge sense of confidence and gratitude that I think if I had never left, like I see certain people who never leave those kind of very comfortable precincts, and they're very consumed that like they have this kind of BMW and their neighbor has this better kind of BMW. And I always just felt very lucky, and I think that sense of gratitude for having grown up in America at the height of its wealth and power at a time when that wasn't so ironic, and we really thought the world was getting better, which is so crazy to younger people now. I mean, I'm not that old, but I feel that younger people don't realize how much we had a sense of progress. We had a sense, of course, we knew there were problems, racism, sexism, homophobia, but all that was really improving. And we kind of thought, okay, well, there's still problems, but we're getting there. And now everything, when I was in my 20s, it all kind of came crashing down. So I was very grateful for that.
Onto your writing career. How did it start for you?
It started when I had a sort of dark ambition to be a writer. And I had no idea what that really meant. I just kind of wanted to do it, but I didn't know the practicalities. And then when I got out of university and I moved to New York and I started working in publishing, I was fascinated by how do ideas circulate in society? So how does my little stupid idea, which goes from my brain and it goes into my computer, then how does that get into the bookshop in Seattle or in Johannesburg or Hong Kong? That's what I learned in publishing, is how ideas circulate in society. And I thought, okay, now that I know this infrastructure, which, it's very much, it's a language also. It's a foreign language.
How does it work?
It works that there's a whole army of people with different specialities. So, the book is written, and then it goes to an agent, and then it goes to a publisher, and then at the publisher, it goes through the many, many levels of people at the publishing house. And then it goes to a publicist whose job is to make sure that people write about it and read it. And then it goes to the salespeople who make sure that it's available in the bookshop in Chicago or wherever. And then it goes to reviewers who might write about it. And then it goes to an interviewer who might give you some attention to talk about it. It's really hundreds of people. So your name is on the book. And it is your book. You wrote the book. But there's all these other people behind it that you don't see, and that are also part of the way that ideas get into society. And I've been listening to a lot of interviews with Ta-Nehisi Coates recently, who has another book about a subject I'm writing about now, which is Palestine. He always says that politics is downstream from culture. So we always feel like you're writing your little book and your sonnet or your symphony. Who cares, right? But in fact, he's very articulate in saying, no, like you might not see how it impacts people later down the road politically in making policies and shaping opinion, but it does. So I think it's a fascinating process. It's like a ecosystem. It's like a rainforest.
So your first book, tell me about it.
So I had lived in France when I was a kid, and I spoke French and I spoke Spanish. And I it's amazing now that I thought, okay, I've kind of seen Europe, but this is how we think, Americans. And it was the 90s, and everybody was fascinated by China. So I thought, I'm going to go to college and study Chinese. And I was really excited about Chinese. I sort of was, I read everything about it that I could learn. And I went to Chinese class for like 2 weeks, and I was so bad at Chinese, and I just couldn't do the sounds, and I couldn't. And I thought, and the professor said it'll take 10 years to read the newspaper, to learn how to read the newspaper. And I thought, oh my God, like I'm too lazy to spend 10 years learning to read the newspaper. It's bad enough that I can read it in English, And so I dropped out of Chinese and I studied Portuguese because it was the only class at the same time, the only language class. And in that class, it's a lot easier than Chinese, especially if you know French is like basically the same thing. And I met this writer, Clarice Lispector, who was this writer of this little tiny book called The Hour of the Star that I read in Portuguese, which I half understood. And I fell in love with her. And I went to Brazil. And anyway, making this long story short, I eventually wrote Why This World, a biography of Clarice Lispector, which was something I wrote in my mid-20s. And I'm very proud of that book, because after that, we've translated her for years, and I spent 20 years making sure she's available all over the world. And I'm here in Jaipur. I just met a little high school girl who's writing her thesis on Clarice Lispector in Rajasthan. So I feel really, if I do nothing else but have, brought her around the world, that I can die.
Tell us about her work.
Well, so she's a Jewish refugee from Ukraine who comes to Brazil as an infant. And she's this extremely beautiful woman, extremely glamorous woman, who looked like a wealthy sort of Rio society lady. She married an ambassador, she travels the world. But all the while, she's writing this mystical fiction, which is sort of how God erupts into the lives of everyday women, mainly women. And I'd never read anything like her. And it's so funny that now I'm 48, which means so I'm going on 30 years of reading and talking about her, and I never got over it. It's still, when I open up the pages, I just feel that same, like a great love affair, like a real love affair gets better and deeper as time goes by. And a one night stand, it could have been good for a couple of hours, but you go to breakfast and never think about it again. And real love is the one that, stays with you for a lifetime.
Yeah. How was the book received?
It was received shockingly well. And I say shockingly because I was such a novice, and I was writing about a subject that nobody had heard of. And actually a lot of people would say, oh, who cares about this dead Brazilian lady that nobody's ever heard of? And I thought, they're going to care about it. They're going to care about it because when they see how fabulous she is. And so I got an incredible amount of publicity all around the world, and particularly in Brazil, because it was actually the first biography of a Brazilian author written in English. And so that was just really fun. And it was fun to bring her back to Brazil in a way, which I thought I was taking her outside of Brazil, but it turned out I got a lot of really great responses in Brazil, and I still write in Brazil, and I still talk in Brazil, and I am still lots of friends that came out of that book. So it was, and that's how my whole career got started.
What came next?
So I thought naively, now I'm done with Clarice about 4 or 5 years later. I've done all those things. I was in Rio, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go to the bookshops, and I'm going to go visit a museum or walk around. This one day, the first day I thought I was done, I got an email from someone I know in New York who said, we've read your book, and the estate wants you to write the biography of Susan Sontag. So this is, for an American, this is about as big an honor as you can have to be asked. And I had hesitated because I know how hard it is to write a biography. It takes years, and you have to be completely obsessed. You have to be completely motivated to make it perfect, because there's the amount of material for anybody's life, even a non-famous person's life, it's just, the documentation is vast. But I was so excited because by then I was living in Europe again, and I was so happy to be coming back to America in a way, and to be writing about American history and philosophy and literature from the perspective of one of our most fascinating writers.
Do you think, and obviously the Pulitzer judges thought that you unlocked the key to Sontag. What do you think, what made her tick?
Well, I think I did unlock the key to it. And I think I can say that, it sounds immodest, but I think that I didn't get her. The thing about her is she was, when you go into the journals, and I went into this 100 volumes of journals in Los Angeles, and half of them, or not half of them, but a percentage of them are locked, and you weren't allowed to see them. And this is, of course, for a biographer, you want the source that nobody has. You want the sexy scandal that nobody knows about and all this. And instead of that, what I found was, in those journals, was this incredibly divided, doubtful, insecure person. Because Sontag projected this. She was like the Statue of Liberty. She was the most wise, knowledgeable, radical, fascinating, brilliant person. And you find in these journals, you don't find sex scandals. What you find is this insecure little girl. And that was so much more shocking to me than finding some, she slept with somebody in 1957, who cares? But so I think the way that she produced this titanic figure out of, a pretty average person. I mean, of course, she was not an average person, but her feelings and her thoughts and her insecurities and her anxieties were totally normal. And so I think that gave me the key, her wanting to be something she wasn't. I think insecurity is a gift. I think that people who achieve a lot in life are insecure. They want something. People who don't achieve a lot in life are also insecure. But they let it get in their way rather than using it as a stimulus to be better, to be more, to know more, to do more, to go to more places, to learn, to read. They get paralyzed by it. And she didn't. And so I found that very inspiring.
As I've referenced several times, you won the Pulitzer for that book. Tell me about that.
Well, that was something I recommend to everyone. And especially the timing of it was so great. Because as I said, I came to India in January, and then the world ended in February, March. And I was locked in my house, like all of us. And I was so, I wasn't miserable. I wasn't locked in some 5-meter apartment. Like a lot of people, like in places like New York and Paris, people were locked in tiny apartments. They couldn't leave. I do have a partner, I do have like other people in my life that I was seeing, but it was depressing. And to get that in May, and I was, I've been at this writing thing for 20 years with the same insecurities every writer has, the same doubt, the same, well, what am I doing? Forcing myself every day to get up and write something that I hope somebody's going to care about. And then you get the ultimate reward that somebody cared about it. And so I think it got me through the pandemic. And it's nice. I mean, it's so funny. People treat you completely differently. You even introduced me, said, oh, this is Benjamin Moser. He won the Pulitzer Prize. And then this person who has this incredible commercial success, of which I could never dream, is instantly impressed by me. I haven't even opened my mouth. He doesn't know anything about me. Maybe I'm a complete moron, I mean, a lot of terrible people get prizes.
I thought that was so interesting because the person you're talking about is Vikas Swarup, who wrote the book that eventually became the film Slumdog Millionaire. And I did ask you both, what would you rather have? Vikas's huge popularity and enormous wealth now off the back of that, or your critical success, and you both chose the others.
No, I don't really choose the others. I would rather have a Pulitzer Prize than a bestseller. I would, because I have a very high concept of what being a writer is. It has nothing to do with commercial success. It has to do with certain values that one incarnates in one's life.
Why do you think that the two are generally mutually exclusive?
Well, I don't think they are. I think it's often true that certain commercial, what we call commercial fiction, for example, it is often trashy. But actually a lot of commercial nonfiction is also trashy. I think that in my experience, writing a book, my first book about Clarice Lispector was a book about somebody that nobody had ever heard of. I had absolutely no expectation of commercial success. But I do know that people like learning stuff. People like new stuff. They don't like trash. I think people think they like trash, but just as we don't feel nice if you eat disgusting fast food, you feel nice if you eat healthy food. You feel better if you if you look at beautiful art rather than if you look at ugly, trashy art. I think that my idea of what I wanted to write when I was a kid, was I didn't want to go low. And that's something Sontag also, she only catered to the highest taste. And she wrote things that are almost unreadable now. Some of them are so complex and philosophical, but people loved it because actually people don't like being stupid. They don't like eating gross food. They don't like listening to bad music. They don't like ugly architecture. But for some reason, I think we've convinced ourselves that more people like bad books than good books. It can't be true, right? Yeah. Maybe it can be true. now that I think about it.
Your latest book is really a mission of love. You've spent 20 years thinking about this book and thinking about all the questions you wanted answered. So tell me about your latest work.
Well, my latest work is called The Upside Down World, Meetings with the Dutch Masters. And it's about 20 years of my life in the Netherlands, where I came from my partner who's Dutch, and trying to figure out my way through this culture, which is a culture. I mean, it's a great culture. It happens to have an incredible history of visual artists, but it was more about any culture in a way. Like, how do you, if you lose your own culture and you end up somewhere else, like, who are you? What do you do? But it's also me trying to answer these questions that we're talking about writing and art. Like, what is art and what's the point of it? Why are you doing this? Are you writing books because you want to make money? I mean, that's a really stupid approach. If I mean, good luck. I mean, maybe I'm happy. I'm always amazed when it works out for somebody, but that's not the motivation. What is the point of art? What does it do to you? What does it do to society? What are your obligations as an artist? Is art worth dying for? Because many people feel it is. But what does that mean? What does it mean to have success? I mean, when I started off, I was a total nobody, I had no name, I had nothing. And so you're always afraid of failure. Well, then in my case, I was lucky enough to by some fucking miracle, I actually managed to succeed at this stupid job. And that creates its own problems, because if you look at the lives of these artists, you see a lot of them are actually wrecked by success. You can have too much success. Success can box you into a corner. If you're really good at painting landscapes and you try to then paint a portrait, people don't care about your portrait. They want you to keep doing the same thing. So, do you have to go all the way to the end? Can you die? You can die, of course. But are you allowed to die? Clarice Lispector says about Virginia Woolf, she said, I can't forgive her for killing herself. The terrible duty is to go to the end. And so I'm not saying I was planning on killing myself, but I was, can you write one book and then not write another book? I mean, some people do. Do you have to keep going your whole life and die? Rembrandt dies at the easel. And when I was looking at these Dutch painters who I loved and who are just there's so many of them and they're so smart and they're so crazy. Quite a lot of them are really crazy. And a lot of them die really young and a lot of them fail. Even Vermeer fails. I mean, I had this obsession when I was younger with the ugly Vermeers, because Vermeer stands for perfect beauty and stillness, but actually there's quite a few ugly Vermeers. And I loved this because it made me feel so, rather than looking down on this person, I felt close to him, because it wasn't, I thought, okay, well, he was just another guy sitting in his room, just like I am. And his painting, Tuesday wasn't such a good day for him. And it made me feel really close to him. So how does failure lead to success? If it does, how does success lead to failure? So the Upside Down World is a lot about those questions, but seen through a kind of history of the Dutch visual arts.
Now, speaking of death, many of those artists, most of those artists, were dead by 40, as were some of their subjects, and you're very interesting on that.
Well, there's an idea that Dutch art is about wealthy people, and it's kind of this hobby for rich people, basically. And if you actually look at some of the Dutch artists, I mean, Vermeer got to be 43, which is actually quite old compared to some of them. And I remember when I turned 36, my father called me. This will give you a little insight into how I grew up. And he said, congratulations. By this point in his life, Mozart was already dead. So, there is this kind of pressure to do something with yourself. But the society looked quite prosperous from the outside. But some of these people, I mean, it's just like a massacre. The death rate of Amsterdam in the 17th century, I think there's 4 different epidemics where more than 10% of the population of the city dies in 1 century. And this is in the richest city in the world, which is Amsterdam in the 17th century. So you realize how Naipaul actually says we cannot imagine the lives of our grandparents. Even our grandparents lived in such a different world. And so go back 400 years and you realize these people are such strangers to us. Like, we think we see them and we know them. We don't. we can just have the faintest whisper of an idea of what their lives were like.
You tell the story of one person who posed for a painting who, within a couple of years, his life had utterly changed.
Yeah. Are you talking about the Hinlopens, the Metsu portrait, which is this family, a very rich, one of the richest families in the Netherlands. And there they are showing off. You know, if it was today, they would have their Range Rover and their, big mansion. And the family portrait with all their maids, and the kid has a parrot, and they just look like the most smug rich people you can imagine. And if you look at what happened to these people, within about 3 years, all their children were dead. They themselves were dead in their 40s. Even the servants were dead. Just of diseases that we can't imagine. There's so many things we can just take a pill for, things that in that time would kill you. So, I mean, what is it like to live? How do you live and create something when you think, okay, I'm 26, I may only have 3 or 4 years left? It's very hard for us to imagine because we've been able to put off this moment, which we know, of course, is coming for all of us, but it might not be this week. It gives it an intensity, and it sort of inspired me to live more intensely as well.
What's your next project?
My next project is my first really political project, which is a history of Jews who oppose Zionism, who have always been around, still around, and more every day, thank God, who saw that the transformation of the Jewish people, which was a religious people, it was not a race, it was not anything that was, it wasn't really a political nation at all. It was a religious community. So I'm writing about those people for the last 200 years and why, from the left, from the right, religious people, atheists, communists, conservatives, for all sorts of reasons, why they opposed this obviously terrible idea.
And you're going to do that from Amsterdam?
I am. And but I've also traveled all over the world for it already. I've been in South Africa, I've been in Egypt, I've been in America, I've been in Brazil, I've been all over Europe, because it's a global story about people who, for all these different reasons, determined to resist this idea.
Benjamin Moser, thank you so much for talking to me.
How fun to talk to you.
Benjamin Moser, thank you. Sontag, her life and work is widely available, as are Ben's other books. You've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the producer Steph Chungu and to the Jaipur Literature Festival. You can download this show and previous episodes from our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.